Economy of South Korea. Background of South Korea. Korea was administratively partitioned in 1945. During end of World War II. As Korea was under Japanese rule during World War II. Korea was officially a belligerent against the Allies by virtue of being Japanese territory. The unconditional surrender of Japan led to the division of Korea into two occupation zones. This division was meant to be temporary and was first intended to return a unified Korea back to its people. South Korea's subsequent history is marked by alternating periods of democratic and autocratic rule. The First Republic, arguably democratic at its inception, became increasingly autocratic until its collapse in 1960. Since its inception, South Korea has seen substantial development in education, economy, and culture. Since 1960s, the country has developed from one of Asia's poorest to one of the world's wealthiest nations. Education, particularly at the tertiary level, has expanded dramatically. It is said to be one of the four tigers of rising Asian states along with Singapore, Taiwan, and Hong Kong. Economic data. The economy appears set to decelerate in the first quarter of 2019, amid slowing global demand for Korean goods. This is reflected by a further decrease in the manufacturing PMI in February, and merchandise exports falling in annual terms at the fastest pace in nearly 3 years in the same month. The labor market is also showing signs of weakness, with the unemployment rate increasing to a multi-year high in January, while consumer confidence remained in pessimistic territory, despite picking up in February. This follows a second reading released by the Bank of Korea in March, which confirmed the economy expanded at a significantly faster rate in the fourth quarter of 2018 than in the third quarter. Economic growth in Q4 was underpinned by exceptionally strong government consumption and a third consecutive contribution from the external sector, as well as from a more supportive base effect. Data for inflation in South Korea. South Korea's annual inflation rate fell to 0.4% in March of 2019, from 0.5% in the previous month, well below market expectations of 0.9%. It was the lowest inflation rate since August 2016, mainly driven by a slowdown in cost of housing and utilities. On a monthly basis, consumer prices declined 0.2%, following a 0.4% increase a month earlier, and compared to market consensus of a 0.4% gain. Inflation rate in South Korea averaged 7.28% from 1966 until 2019, reaching an all-time high of 32.50% in October of 1980, and a record low of 0.20% in February of 1999. Data for unemployment in South Korea. The unemployment rate in South Korea edged up to 3.8% in March 2019, compared to 3.7% in February 2019, and market expectations of 3.9%. The number of unemployed went up by 25,000 to 1.058 million, whereas the number of employed climbed by 29,000 to 27.088 million. The labor force participation rate fell inched to 63.4% from 63.3%. Unemployment rate in South Korea averaged 3.65% from 1999 until 2019, reaching an all-time high of 7.10% in June of 1999, and a record low of 3% in September of 2002.
Review on the unemployment and inflation problem in South Korea. Unemployment rate.
Unemployment can be defined as labor force participants being available and willing to work, but are unable to find jobs. Therefore, the unemployment rate is a percentage of the labor force that is unemployed and is actively seeking employment. One of the causes of the increasing in the unemployment rate in South Korea is the changes that are made in the public sector. They are the most crucial because of its heavy and often non-transparent government involvement in the financial and corporate sectors usurps the market-based controls over the availability and cost of money. Its gross economic efficiency is relative to other free market countries. Other than that is the tax system that is implemented in South Korea. The tax system in this country has a heavily trust on indirect taxes which account for about 50% of tax revenue. The resident and non-resident single and groups are responsible for the taxation. The real estate rental earnings, business earnings, income which is earned, temporary property earnings and miscellaneous earnings attributed to a resident are taxed increasingly. In addition, the rising of minimum wages in South Korea is also one of the causes of increasing rate of unemployment in this country. Its rate jumped to 9-year high in January 2019 as more people shunned low-paying work in the face of rising minimum wages, putting further pressure on the economy and deepening the policy frustrations. The rate of the unemployment rose to 4.4% in seasonally adjusted terms, the highest recorded since the 4.7% level posted. This causes on-job losses which can be seen in manufacturing and construction sectors, which is gotten from Statistics Korea.
Inflation rate.
Inflation can be defined as a continuous increase in the general price level of goods and services in the economy. There are two main types of inflation. Firstly is demand pull inflation. Amid the continuing high rate of increment in the price of agriculture in 2011, livestock and marine products, inflationary factors in the supply side appears to persist in South Korea. Korea Development Institute, KDI, noted that services price, which largely reflects the factors in the demand side, rose 2.5% in February from the previous month, suggesting both supply and demand factors contributed to rising inflation. Said Finance Minister of South Korea Im Jong-yong, inflation stemmed mainly from supply-side shocks, such as higher oil prices and supply shortages of agricultural and livestock products caused by abnormal cold weather and foot-and-mouth disease outbreak. He also added, the supply-side factors have mainly driven the consumer prices of the nation higher, but it appears that sign of demand-side inflation emerges gradually. The second one is cost-push inflation. It can be defined as inflation which is caused by an increase in prices of inputs like labor, raw material and so on. This can be divided into three, which are wage push inflation, profit push inflation and supply shock inflation. But in this case, we are focusing on the first type of cost push inflation, which is wage push inflation. This causes a backlash against a minimum wage hike in South Korea. Some businesses complain that they cannot afford to pay the new wage, which rose by 16% to 7,531 an hour as of January 1. Overcome inflation. In monetary policy, the Bank of Korea raised interest rates for the first time in more than 6 years to 1.5%, yet tempered market expectations for further hikes by raising concerns about the job market and other uncertainties. In fiscal policy, The South Korean tax system is fairly effective in generating sufficient public revenues without weakening the national economy's competitive position. South Korea has one of the lowest tax rates in the OECD, with tax revenues totaling about 25% of GDP as of 2014. The Moon administration is expected to impose higher tax rates on wealthy people and businesses that afford to pay more, with the aim of paying for expended job creation and social welfare policies. In August 2017, the Ministry of Strategy and Finance announced new tax reform proposals designed to redistribute wealth and increase the tax revenue base. Under these plans, the income tax rate for those whose taxable income exceeds. How South Korea overcome unemployment. In fiscal policy, decrease the taxes to control unemployment. Reduce the tax burden on labor. A reduction in the burdens of income tax, Social Security tax would make it more attractive for employees, suppliers of labor, and employers, demanders of labor, to make an exchange. When more labor is exchanged, there is a lower probability of each person finding themselves partly or fully involuntarily unemployed. As an additional benefit, people will spend more time in productive activities which result in additional goods and services. The fact that the link between lower labor taxes and higher annual work hours also holds for this category suggests one thing, which is faced with lowers labor tax burden will make unemployment rate falls. In monetary policy, lowering the discount rate by cuts bank loan rate. The South Korean Central Bank cut its discount rate from 5 to 3%. By lowering the rate which it charges commercial banks for a loan backed by securities, the central bank hopes to spur lending to small and medium-sized companies. A decline in the discount rate is followed by a decline in other interest rates, which leads to increased borrowing and increased investment by private businessmen. Indirect control measures, training and technical education used to overcome unemployment. More training and education should be provided for individuals who have difficulties securing a job. When an individual upgrade their skills and increase their knowledge, they will be able to find jobs easily. As an example, unemployed graduates are given free short courses to learn computer skills and language. Conclusion. The economic welfare of any country depends on the rate of the economic growth. The problems that occur can affect the economy adversely as the productivity falls below the normal level. As in this context, we take unemployment as the problem. The economists describe unemployment as a condition of jobless within an economy. One of the major indicators of the economics health of the country is the degree of unemployment. As South Korea chooses to overcome this problem using fiscal and monetary policy, inflation is like almost all other economic processes caused by supply or demand balance. It is quite obvious that inflation matters in different ways to different parts of the economic value chain, and depending on which type of inflation we are seeing, different companies will benefit or suffer in different ways. Based on action takes by South Korea, we know that monetary policy alone is not sufficient to control inflation. Therefore, it is supported by fiscal policy. It majorly pertains to taxation and interest policies. From various monetary, fiscal and other measures become clear that to control inflation and unemployment, government should adopt all measures simultaneously. Inflation is like a hydra-headed monster, which should be fought by using all the weapons at the command of the government. As a nutshell, we can conclude that South Korea managed to overcome Their inflation and unemployment problems.